That was a very gracious introduction. Thank you very much indeed, Derek. And I want to say how much I've enjoyed the prize-winning readings. And it occurs to me that good prose and good poetry have a great deal in common. There are vast differences, of course, but the main thing they have in common is vitality of rhythm, rhythmic vitality. And we've had both kinds of vitality this evening from the prose writers and from the poets. I'm going to read um, for about 15 or 20 minutes. Is that okay?
That's perfect, Michael. You fire away, yeah.
And I'd like to begin with a poem I wrote when I was in my 30s. This is about 50 years old, and it was inspired by watching swans mating on the Grand Canal in Dublin. And although I wrote it all that time ago, I still have it by heart. It was such a joy to write. Swans mating. Even now, I wish that you had been there, sitting beside me on the riverbank, the cob and his pen sailing in rhythm until their small heads met and the final heraldic moment dissolved in ripples. This was a marriage and a baptism, a holding of breath, nearly a drowning. Wings spread wide for balance where he trod, her feathers full of water and her neck under the water like a bar of light. And a love poem from much later in my life when I had been married for a number of years. This poem's called The Pattern, if I can find it. Just a minute. Well, you bear with me, please. I have
No
them
worries,
all.
Michael. You work away.
No, where are they? Jesus, is it? Okay. Will you look? Bear with me while I look it up in the. Um,
In your
my
index.
my
That's
wife
all right.
is my wife is sorting me out here.
That's all right. That might be the story of your life, Michael. I don't know.
Yeah, here it is. This is about discovering the pattern out of which my wife's wedding dress was made. The pattern. 36 years to the day after our wedding, when a cold, figure revealing wind blew against you and lifted your veil, I find in its fat envelope the 6 shilling Vogue pattern for your bride's dress, complicated instructions for stitching bodice and skirt, box pleats and hems, tissue paper outlines, semblances of skin which I nervously unfold and hold up in snowlight, for snow has been falling on this windless day, and I glimpse your wedding dress and white shoes outside in the transformed garden where the clothesline and every twig have been covered. Now, I'll read one of the poems you mentioned that you've been talking to the students about, uh, Above Duoctree. Now, this is about Mayo, but I actually wrote this poem in Italy. So it's Mayo remembered passionately in Italy. Above Duoctree, where the Duiks of sandy plain uh, behind dunes, where the Duik rises to a small plateau that overlooks the sand dunes from Duoctree to Rune Keel, and just beyond the cottage's higgledy perimeter fence posts at Corrigsky 1, bury my ashes. For the burial mound at Temple du Mor has been erased by wind and sea, the same old Stone Age sea that came as far inland as Clunamana and chose the place that I choose as a promontory, a fort. Let boulders at the top encircle me, neither a dry stone wall nor a cairn, space for the otter to dive and the mountain hare to lick snow stains from her underside, a table for the peregrine and ravens, a prickly double bed as well, nettles and carline thistles, a sheep's wool pillow, so that should she decide to join me there, our sandy dander to a Laren Point or Tonakira will take forever.
That's wonderful, Michael.
And a poem about the cottage where I often sit quietly and try and think of the people that lived there before we went to it. This is a poem called Kaylee. People that lived there were deeply civilized, although they lived in this remote part. They all played a couple of musical instruments, sang songs, spoke Irish, spoke English. This is about the O'Toole family, and it's called Kaylee. A Kaylee at Corrigsky 1 would now include the ghost of Joe O'Toole at ease on his hummock, the far side of Corrigan Lake, as he listens to the O'Tooles from Inishdago, who settled here 80 years ago. 13 O'Tooles, each of them a singer or fiddler, 13 under the one roof. A happy family, but an unlucky one, Joe says. And the visitors from Connemara who have rowed their currachs across the Killary for the music. And my ghost at the Duke's sheep-bitten edge, keeping an eye on the lamps in the window here, but distracted by the nervy plover that pretends a broken wing, by the long-lived oyster catcher that calls out behind me from Talibon Strand. The 13 O'Tooles are singing about everything. Their salty eggs are cherished for miles around. There's a hazel copse near the lake without a name. Dog violets, sorrel, wood spurge are growing there. On Inishdago, there's a well of the purest water. Is that Arcturus or a faraway outhouse light? The crescent moons are coracle for Venus. Look, through the tide and over the Owen Ardonon are shouldered the coffins of the 13 O'Tooles.
Wonderful, Michael.
And a couple of poems I have to. Well, you've mentioned them about the Troubles, and I'll read this one, which is called "The Ice Cream Man," which lists a lot of the flowers that I saw in. I was on a trip botanizing in the Burren, and I thought I'd write down in a notebook all the flowers I could name in one day, which I did. And when I got home, I learned from my daughter Sarah that the ice cream man on the Lisburn Road had been murdered in a paramilitary attack. And I just arranged the beautiful flower names in a rhythm to make a kind of a prayer for the ice cream man. The poem's addressed to Sarah, who loved the ice cream man shop, still does. The ice cream man, which brings together Belfast and Clare. Belfast in the western seaboard of Ireland, two places I really love. Rum and raisin, vanilla, butterscotch, walnut, peach. You would rhyme off the flavors. That was before they murdered the ice cream man on the Lisburn Road, and you bought carnations to lay outside his shop. I named for you all the wild flowers of the burren I had seen in one day. Thyme, valerian, loosestrife, meadowsweet, twayblade, crowfoot, ling, angelica, herb robert, marjoram, cow parsley, sundew, vetch, mountain avens, wood sage, ragged robin, stitchwort, yarrow, lady's bedstraw, bindweed, bog, pimpernel. And I think I mean that list to go on forever. And in 94, there were rumors that it was going
We
to
lost
be...
you there, Michael.
What?
We lost you there slightly, Michael. You froze on us just for a second, or at least you did on my computer anyway. Do you want to start there again? After the ice cream man?
In August 94, there were rumors that there was going to be a ceasefire. And at that time I was reading the Iliad, and I was at the passage where the old King Priam plucks up courage and visits the tent of Achilles to beg for the body of his son Hector, whom Achilles has killed in combat. And it's the soul of the Iliad, this episode for me. And it's quite long, and I compressed it into a sonnet. Ceasefire. Put in mind of his own father and moved to tears, Achilles took him by the hand and pushed the old king gently away. But Priam curled up at his feet and wept with him until their sadness filled the building. Taking Hector's corpse into his own hands, Achilles made sure it was washed, and for the old king's sake, laid out in uniform, ready for Priam to carry, wrapped like a present home to Troy at daybreak. When they had eaten together, it pleased them both to stare at each other's beauty as lovers might. Achilles built like a god, Priam good-looking still and full of conversation, who earlier had sighed, I get down on my knees and do what must be done, and kiss Achilles' hand, the killer of my son.
Thank you, Michael. Beautifully read.
And I'll end with a recent poem. It's about discovering a flower I didn't know in the back garden, Solomon's seal, which looks a little bit like a lily of the valley. And in this poem, I quote from the Song of Songs, the erotic poems that King Solomon is said to have written. I hope the bits that are in italics on the page are obvious to you, that they sound as though they're in italics, and the less distinguished bits are by me. So just to say how moved I have by the poets and the prose writers, and by the relationship which you clearly have with them, and how deeply you care for your students, and how lucky they are to have you, but also how lucky you are to have them as students.
Thanks very much, Michael. Very astute and wisely said. Thank you.
Well, yes, well, it's been a very enriching evening for me. And I'll end, but I'll say, as a way of saying thank you, I'll read this poem, which is really a spring poem, with its roots in our back garden. Solomon's Seal. Shaded by the self-seeded hazels in a back corner of our garden, to the right of the flowering currant, an unexpected Solomon's Seal I want to show you. Does it matter why such graceful bells are so called? Seals of a medieval document? It's May, and Solomon says, "Rise up, my love, my fair one, and come away. Winter is past, the rain is over and gone. Flowers appear on the earth." A solitary cowslip has survived under our beech, the first grass cutting. The time of the singing of birds is come.
Wow, that's beautiful. And the singing bird himself has sung, if you don't mind that comparison, Michael, announcing the spring and heralding the arrival of new things and growth ahead. I'm going to applaud on behalf of Carlow College St. Patrick's, Michael, and it's been our absolute pleasure to hear your rhythmic musical poetry being read to us in your own very beautiful and inimitable Belfast accent, I have to say. But a beautiful rhythm to it, nevertheless, and a quiet understatement, I would say. So, really marvelous. And thank you so much, Michael, for sharing a new poem with us this evening. Thank you so much. Now, I did promise Margaret we'd keep the event pretty tight in terms of time, and we are getting close to the wire, as it were. But, Michael, I think it would be unfair if I didn't ask you one or two questions, maybe, on behalf of the students, just to get your view on a number of things. So I'm going to just ask a couple of questions, maybe for about 5 minutes, Margaret Hagerty, if that's okay, just to wrap up the evening in a sort of more relaxed note, as it were. So, Michael, my first question to you this evening, as such, is: did you feel destined to be a poet? Did you feel from a young age that you were going to write poetry, or at what point did you write your first poem, and how did poetry come to you?
Well, it dawned on me gradually. When I was about 16, I wrote a poem called the Song of the Night Watchman. I mean, it was rubbish, but I I was hooked by the problems a poem sets and the way you have to solve uh, the problems differently each time. Um, but although the seed had been sown, I didn't really get going until I went from school to university, which was Trinity College Dublin. And there I really got hooked on it. I used to write about 4 or 5 poems a day. They were all absolute rubbish, but I was uh, drawn into what Yeats calls the fascination of what's difficult. And then uh, I suppose around about 1960, when I would have been 20, I wrote my first poem, which was any good. I can remember it if I think called Marigolds. It's very short. She gave him marigolds, the colour of autumn, to keep in his cold room, and the late light of autumn gilded all their moments. And really, by the time I'd written that, a poet was all that I wanted to be, and that's all I want to be. Really, is a poet. It's a strange drug and a strange obsession and an incandescent excitement. I can think of nothing more exciting than writing a poem. And I mean, there were 10 years in my 40s when I didn't write anything. So one must never take it for granted. And when one has nothing to say, one must keep quiet. And during that decade, I had nothing to say, and I kept quiet. And it seems to me that silence is part of the enterprise, because when you get to my state of writing for 60 years, um, you're quite deft and nimble, so it's easy to produce forgeries, and it's a sin against the light to produce forgeries. It's much better to remain silent.
Well, that's a very profound and serious statement, and tells us about your own integrity, Michael, and the seriousness with which you take your craft, and almost religious seriousness in the best sense of that word, I would say. So, that's a wonderful answer, and we'll ponder it over as we can look over the recording after the night's over as such. But Michael, you mentioned going to Trinity and writing there. Am I right in remembering that you met Derek Mahon when you were in Trinity? Because I know he was a student in Trinity. And I suppose my next question is, how important has the company of other poets and writers been to you in your journey, in real life form or on the page, if I can ask it that way?
Well, meeting Derek, befriending Derek, our friendship lasted for 60 years, uh, was central, really. It's certainly in those early days. And I moved then from Trinity, from Dublin up to Belfast, where my wife Edna got a job at Queen's. And it was there that I met Seamus Heaney. And those were the two great friendships of my life. They've been followed by friendships with Paul Muldoon, Frank Ormsby, a whole wonderful galaxy of Northern Irish poets. And I do think that talent does come in groups. When you think of the French Impressionists, I think they're my favorite example. You think of that cycle, that list of marvelous German composers, uh, and they all get to know each other, and they inspire one another. There's a sense of comradeship and support on the one hand, and on the other hand, competition. And there's a kind of um, what's it called when air currents go up? Convection. There's a kind of convection current which lifts you all up together, and it's a kind of magic. And then I also keep an eye open reading. I read quite a lot of poetry. I don't actually read many poetry books from cover to cover. I'm inclined to dip into books, and for me, finding a poem that I didn't know before, or even better, finding a poem I didn't know before by a poet I've never heard of before, is almost like writing a poem of my own.
No, that's marvelous and very generous in ways, Michael. So, fair play to you. You've mentioned there the Impressionist painters, and I take it the German composers you're talking about are Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven. I'm guessing. So, my next question is, how important were the sister arts of poetry, painting, and music to your own creative life over the decades?
Well, it's of central importance. I listen to music every day. I am addicted to Radio 3, BBC Radio 3, and the composers, my favorite composers for a number of years have been Bach and Schubert. But I love many composers, and I think the last century, the 20th century, might have one of the very richest times for music. You know, when you think of Shostakovich, Prokofiev, Stravinsky, Janacek, it's extraordinary. Debussy, Ravel, um, and that's uh, and listening to beautiful music and writing poetry for me meet at some deep level in at the bottom of my mind. Uh, and I also love jazz. I find the rhythm of music and the harmonies uh, sort of uh, help to keep me in tune. Um, I think that melody, what I would call melody, is extraordinarily important in poetry, and the sound of the music and the mysterious way in poetry that the melody and the meaning are inseparable. You can't really paraphrase a poem, but
Correct. That's right. The sonic texture is ineluctable. Is that the word from Joyce? It's intrinsic to the whole thing, as it were. You know.
well, it is, as you say. And then the other part, a central part of my life is looking at pictures. And I mean, that began in the school library where there were these big Phaidon, Thames and Hudson art books. And I remember, especially on a Friday afternoon, when the week was over, going in there and the light coming through the big windows and looking at my first introduction to Degas and Monet and Vincent van Gogh uh, and the French Impressionists. It's still it's a kind of a sunburst, isn't it? It's a
Yes.
sunburst, and they're still an important part of my life. And then going to London for the first time when I was 16, and in the National Gallery, I can remember standing in front of the Vincent van Gogh picture of the chair in the room in his bedroom. You know that lovely chair?
Absolutely. Yeah. The artist
Uh,
chair.
and just going up as close as the alarm bells would allow me to look at the brush strokes. And that's still a key part of my life. And then the wonderful thing is that my younger daughter, Sarah, is an artist. And I say, and I half mean it, I don't completely mean it. I say that I'm going to be famous as Sarah Longley's dad,
Right.
famous as Sarah's Long. Yeah. And she can just do anything with paint or charcoal or pencil. And she lives uh, her art in much the same way as I live my poetry. And we now share. She lives in the Western Highlands in a place called Lockhouse, and uh, I I introduced her to Corrick One, and she in return, in a reciprocal way, has introduced me to Lockhouse, and we collaborate uh, on drawings and pictures and poems, and it's a it's a blessing really. So I think of the of art and music of music and art, especially as it's filtered through my daughter, as blessings, as blessings,
Yeah.
as part of what you call. I think I agree with you. For me, poetry is a religious experience. I'm not religious, but you don't have to believe in anything to be religious.
No.
And when I see a beautiful wildflower or hear a curlew or a skylark, um, I my attentiveness, my thrill, it's like an electric shock going through me. It, that's a religious experience, and the to have another soul, creative soul, who's my flesh and blood, that shares this religious attentiveness and devoutness uh, is a central blessing in my life.
Oh, that's marvelous. And in a way, Michael, I was going to ask one or two other questions, but I cannot think of really a better note to end on. You've brought us there to a climactic experience, but I'd love to have chatted longer, but unfortunately the clock is against us. I'm going to have to, I really want to ask you too about your wonderful wife, Edna Longley, who's been a great companion to you, I know, on the journey of poetry in your life. And she's been of great assistance to you there this evening. So we have to thank Edna in the wings there, let it be said. But I don't know if Edna wants to stick her head in there or she's shy
Come on,
about that. I don't know. Edna, thank you very much.
And I've enjoyed the evening immensely.
Well,
Catch
thank
me
you very much. And thank you, Edna. And Michael, just to say, you've graced us with your wonderful presence, your great words, your dedication, and your love of poetry that has seen you make your own distinctive contribution to this really great art that I believe is one of the most primal of arts that humans have been capable of since we climbed out of the trees back in the African savannas. As soon as we could talk, I think we were writing poetry, and we will keep writing poetry. I'm pretty convinced. There are many who like to sound the death knell in this digital age that poetry is over. And we know, Michael, it's not over. It might only just be beginning. So, Michael, on behalf of us all, we're getting wonderful comments there in the chat, by the way. Everybody's saying what a wonderful evening they've had and how much they've enjoyed it, Michael. So you can't see that as such and you can't hear the applause, but I know we've had a wonderful evening here in Carlow, virtually, let's say. And thank you so much for beaming in and being with us and so gracious from Belfast. I'm looking forward to your next book, Michael, now. No
Oh.
pressure.
Good. Yeah, it's my best one yet.
Exactly, the best is yet to come, as Van Morrison would say. Another great Belfast fan. Michael, I'm going to applaud you on behalf of everybody. Wish you and Edna a wonderful evening. Sit back, relax, have yourselves a cup of tea, put on some jazz or some Brahms, and enjoy yourselves there. And I wish you many more years of happiness, writing, and creativity. And I know Edna's enjoying her retirement. She's probably writing away in a few books there as we speak. So keep at it, the two of you. You're a wonderful pair. Thank you. You've given Ireland so much and the world. Thank you. All right.